Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a monument to a decade of success. For 10 years, Serena Sterling had stood by her husband Jacob Hayes, helping him build his company from a dream into a towering glass and steel reality. As she prepared to join the anniversary gala at his downtown office, she believed she was celebrating their shared victory. But Jacob was celebrating something else entirely. In front of his most important clients and colleagues, he stood with a younger woman on his arm and with a confident smile introduced her not as an employee, but as his future wife. He had planned every detail of his new life, but he forgot one crucial detail: the name on the deed to the very building they were standing in. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking the city was still carrying only the faint, sterile hum of the climate control system. It was an expensive sound, the sound of silence bought and paid for. Serena Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a ghostly twin against the sprawling tapestry of city lights. To anyone looking in, she had everything. The Sterling name was practically royalty in this city, synonymous with old money and real estate empires. The penthouse, a wedding gift from her late father, Marcus Sterling, was just one jewel in a vast crown. Her husband, Jacob Hayes, was the other. He was her choice, her rebellion. He hadn't come from money. He had come from ambition. He had a fire in his eyes that she, raised in the cool, predictable corridors of wealth, had found intoxicating. She saw in him a partner, a man with whom she could build something that was theirs alone, not just another extension of the Sterling legacy. And they had. Hayes Ascendancy Partners, a boutique investment firm, was their baby. Her father's initial seed money, a loan Jacob had insisted on formalizing and paying back with interest, had been the soil. Jacob's relentless drive was the sun and water, and Serena's quiet strategic guidance and network of contacts were the trellises that helped it grow. Now, 10 years later, the company was a titan, and Jacob was a king in his own court. A subtle vibration on the marble island countertop pulled her from her reverie. His phone. Jacob had been in the shower for 20 minutes, a ritual that had grown longer and more frequent in recent months. The screen lit up with a notification. Isabel. Can't wait for tonight. The world's about to see what I've known all along. XO. Serena's breath caught in her throat. Isabel Rossi, the new senior analyst hired 6 months ago. She was whip-smart, beautiful, and possessed a hungry ambition that reminded Serena of a younger Jacob. Jacob had praised her effusively, calling her a game-changer for the firm. Serena had met her a few times at company functions. She remembered Isabel's handshake, firm, almost challenging, and her eyes, which had lingered on Jacob for a fraction of a second too long. Serena had dismissed it. It was paranoia, the quiet fear that nibbles at the edges of even the most secure-seeming marriage. Jacob was busy. He was stressed. The 10-year anniversary gala was a massive undertaking, a statement to the financial world. Of course, he was distracted. Late nights were part of the job. His growing distance was just the pressure of success. She had told herself these things 1,000 times, polishing the excuses until they shone like truths. But this message, this was different. The world's about to see. It wasn't a work message. It was a promise, a shared secret. The bathroom door clicked open. Jacob emerged wrapped in a plush charcoal robe, steam rolling out behind him. He was handsome, his dark hair slicked back, his jawline sharp. He had the kind of easy confidence that made people, clients and women alike, trust him implicitly. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He walked over and kissed her cheek, a gesture so routine it felt meaningless. He didn't notice the tension in her shoulders or the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You ready to knock 'em dead tonight, Elle? The governor is confirmed. Mr. Harrington from Consolidated Holdings is flying in just for this. Tonight we solidify our legacy. Our legacy." The word felt like a lie in her mouth. She wanted to hold up the phone to demand a scream. Who is Isabel? What is she about to see? But that wasn't her way. Her father, a man who could dismantle a rival's empire with a single well-timed phone call, had taught her one thing above all: never reveal your hand until you are ready to play the winning card. Emotion was a liability. Information was power. "Of course, darling," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of the supportive wife. "I just need to decide what to wear. Something that says power behind the throne." "Don't you think?" Jacob chuckled, already moving towards his walk-in closet. "Whatever you wear, you'll be the most beautiful woman there, Elle. You always are." The compliment, once a source of genuine warmth, now felt like a cold stone in her stomach. He hadn't truly seen her in years. He saw the sterling name, the perfect hostess, the beautiful accessory on his arm. He had no idea of the storm gathering behind her calm blue eyes. As he disappeared into the closet, Serena took a steadying breath. The gala was in 3 hours. For 10 years she had been the power behind the throne. She had managed the back end, smoothed over ruffled feathers, and connected Jacob with the people who mattered, all while letting him take the spotlight. She had believed they were a team. Now she understood. To him, the throne was only big enough for one, and he was already auditioning her replacement. A cold, hard resolve began to form in her chest, displacing the hurt. Jacob was a meticulous planner. He was about to make a very public, very calculated move tonight. He believed he held all the cards. He believed the company, the legacy, the future was his to command and redefine. She walked over to the large, ornate desk in the corner of the living room, a piece that had belonged to her father. She unlocked a small rosewood box with a silver key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were personal documents her father had insisted she keep separate from the marital estate. Birth certificates, her personal trust documents, and a thick file folder bound in blue. She pulled it out. The label, written in her father's elegant, decisive script, was simple: Hayes Ascendancy Partners, 1200 Westfall Tower, property deed and trust agreement. Jacob had paid back the loan for the seed money, yes. He was very proud of that fact. But her father, ever the pragmatist, had never been one for simple loans when it came to family. The initial investment wasn't just cash, it was a package. And part of that package was the physical office space itself. The top 3 floors of the prestigious Westfall Tower. Her father had bought the space outright through a blind trust and leased it to the company for a symbolic $1 a year. The lease was ironclad, the terms unbreakable. And the sole beneficiary of that trust, the true and legal owner of the property Jacob so proudly called his headquarters, Serena Sterling. She ran her thumb over the embossed seal. Jacob had forgotten this detail. In his rush to build his own empire, he'd forgotten the foundation it was built upon. He saw the building as a symbol of his power. He didn't realize it was actually his cage. Tonight he planned to introduce his future wife to the world. Serena smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. It was a pity, really. He was about to do it in her building. She closed the folder. She had a plan. The hurt was still there, a raw, gaping wound. But now it was accompanied by something else, the icy thrill of the fight. Marcus Sterling's daughter was about to come out and play. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in controlled composure. Serena moved through her preparations with the precision of a surgeon. She selected her dress, a sapphire blue sheath by a designer Jacob didn't know, one that was elegant and commanding rather than merely beautiful. It was the color of ice of deep water. She styled her blonde hair not in the soft waves Jacob preferred, but in a sleek, powerful chignon at the nape of her neck. Her jewelry was minimal but significant: diamond earrings that were a gift from her father on her 21st birthday, and on her right hand, a formidable sapphire ring that matched her dress. She left her wedding ring on the velvet tray in her jewelry box. While she dressed, she made 2 phone calls. The first was to Arthur Pendleton, her father's oldest friend and the family's estate lawyer for 40 years. He was semi-retired, but his mind was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Arthur, it's Serena. Laura, my dear girl. To what do I owe the pleasure? I trust you're calling to remind an old man about the big party tonight. My tuxedo is already laid out. I'll see you there, Arthur. But I need a favor, and I need absolute discretion. The warmth in his voice was immediately replaced by professional gravity. Of course. What is it I need you to bring a document with you tonight? A certified copy of the Westfall Tower Trust Agreement. The original is in my possession, but I want a notarized copy on hand. And I need you to be prepared to act as a legal witness to a conversation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Arthur was one of the few people who knew the intricate details of Marcus Sterling's dealings. He knew exactly what that document represented. He didn't ask why. He simply said, "I'll be there." "Is there anything else?" "Yes," Serena said, looking at her reflection. The woman staring back was someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Be prepared for a bit of theater. The second call was to a man named David Chen, the head of IT security at Hayes Ascendancy Partners. David had been with the company from the start. He was a quiet, unassuming man, fiercely loyal to Serena, because years ago, when his son had fallen gravely ill, it was Serena who had anonymously arranged and paid for a specialist bypassing the company's standard insurance plan. It was a debt he had never forgotten. "David, it's Serena Hayes." She never used her maiden name at the office. Tonight it felt important to maintain the facade. "Mrs. Hayes, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, David. I have a slightly unusual request for the gala tonight. During the main presentation, when Jacob is giving his speech, I need you to do something for me. There will be a large screen behind the podium, correct? The company logo is usually displayed there." "Yes, of course. A looping animation. I'm going to send you a file. At a specific moment, I need you to switch the display from the company logo to this file. I will give you a signal. The signal will be me taking a sip of water from my glass on the front table. A file, Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Hayes has a very specific presentation deck. This will override it just for a moment." Serena said, her voice firm but kind. "David, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't of the utmost importance. This is a private matter, not a corporate one. Can I count on your discretion?" He hesitated for only a second. "For you, Mrs. Hayes. Anything. Send the file." She created a simple, elegant slide. White background, black text. It contained no threats, no accusations. Just a simple statement of fact. A quote from the trust document. "The property located at 1200 Westfall Tower Floors, 48, 49, and 50, is held in the irrevocable Sterling Family Trust, with Serena Sterling as the sole and exclusive beneficiary and legal owner. All leasing agreements are subject to her sole discretion." She emailed it to David with the subject line, "For the presentation." When Jacob emerged from the closet, he looked like the king he so desperately wanted to be. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection. His cufflinks were platinum, and his smile was dazzling. "Wow," he said, his eyes sweeping over her. "You look formidable." It was perhaps the most honest compliment he had given her in years. "Thank you, Jacob. It's a formidable occasion." The ride down in the elevator was silent. The air crackled with unspoken words. Jacob was electric with anticipation, practically vibrating with the energy of the bombshell he was about to drop. He thought he was in control, the master of ceremonies. Serena, seated beside him, was a portrait of serenity, the blue file folder containing the original deed tucked securely in her designer clutch. She felt a strange calm settle over her. The shock had burned away, leaving behind the cold, clear certainty of purpose. She was not just here to witness her husband's betrayal. She was here to manage it. They arrived at Westfall Tower, the grand lobby buzzing with the city's elite. Bankers, politicians, society figures, everyone who was anyone was there. Jacob was immediately swarmed, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Serena stood by his side, the perfect smiling wife, nodding graciously. She saw Isabel Rossi across the room. She was wearing a crimson dress, a bold, declarative statement of a color. She looked radiant, flushed with victory. Her eyes met Serena's for a moment, a flicker of something triumph-pity, before she looked away. Serena felt a fresh pang of pain, but she pushed it down. Pity was the last thing she wanted from that woman. She found Arthur Pendleton by the champagne fountain, a small, unassuming man in a perfectly tailored suit. He gave her a subtle nod, tapping his breast pocket where the certified copy of the deed now rested. "Everything is in place," he murmured as he handed her a glass of champagne. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice low. "Just enjoy the show for now." She moved through the crowd, a queen in her own right. The Sterling name still opened every door, commanded every ounce of respect. Men who had worked with her father for decades came to pay their respects. "Serena, you look stunning. Your father would be so proud of what Jacob has built," one of them said. "My father was a great believer in strong foundations." She replied, her words carrying a double meaning only she understood. She took her seat at the head table, front and center. Jacob's seat was next to hers, but he was still working the room. The seat on his other side was conspicuously empty, a place of honor, waiting. The lights dimmed. The company's COO, a man named Robert, stepped up to the podium. He began his introductory remarks, talking about a decade of growth and visionary leadership. He was setting the stage for the man of the hour, Jacob Hayes. Serena scanned the room. She saw Isabel standing near the side of the stage, partially concealed, a nervous, excited energy radiating from her. She looked like a bride waiting in the wings. Robert concluded his remarks. "And now the man who made it all possible, our founder, our leader, our visionary, Jacob Hayes." The room erupted in applause. Jacob strode to the stage, soaking in the adoration. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes shining. He was at the apex of his life, the peak of his power. He began his speech, his voice resonant and confident, filling the vast space. He spoke of humble beginnings, of daring to dream, of the relentless pursuit of excellence. He was a phenomenal speaker. He was selling a story, and the entire room was buying it. Serena sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching the performance. This last decade, Jacob said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, has been about building a foundation, about sacrifice, about making hard choices to get where we are today. He paused and his eyes swept the room, deliberately skipping over Serena. But success is not a destination, it's a journey. And a journey is meaningless without the right person to share it with. The future requires a new kind of vision, a new kind of partnership. This was it. The air grew thick with anticipation. He was going off script. The crowd murmured, intrigued. "I've brought this company to where it is today," he continued, his voice swelling with emotion. "But for the next chapter, for the future of Hayes Ascendancy, I need a partner who shares my fire, my passion, my vision for what is to come." He turned and extended his hand towards the side of the stage. "And so it is my incredible honor to introduce you not just to a brilliant mind within our company, but to the woman who will be by my side for the next chapter of my life. My inspiration, my partner, my future wife, Isabel Rossi." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Isabel Rossi, glowing in her crimson dress, stepped into the spotlight, taking Jacob's outstretched hand. The applause was scattered, confused. People craned their necks, their eyes darting from the radiant couple on stage to the stone-faced woman sitting at the head table. Serena, his real wife. Jacob beamed, holding Isabel's hand aloft like a trophy. He was so caught up in his moment of triumph, so certain of his own narrative, that he didn't see the shock morphing into discomfort on the faces of his guests. He didn't see the whispers spreading like wildfire. He saw only his bright, shiny future standing beside him. Isabel, for her part, looked deliriously happy, if a little overwhelmed. She gazed at Jacob with pure adoration, seemingly oblivious to the hundreds of eyes now fixed on the wife she was supplanting. In her mind, the story Jacob had fed her for months was finally coming true. He was the brave man leaving a cold, loveless marriage of convenience for true love. She was the heroine of this story. Jacob leaned into the microphone, his voice booming with manufactured sincerity. Isabel and I will lead Hayes Ascendancy into a new dawn. This building, this very office, will be the headquarters of our new beginning. That was the cue. Down at the front table, Serena calmly picked up her glass of water. She took a slow, deliberate sip. Her eyes locked on David Chen, who stood at the tech station at the back of the room. He saw the signal. His face was pale, but he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Behind Jacob and Isabel, the massive screen flickered. The gleaming Hayes Ascendancy Partners logo vanished. For a second, the screen was black. Then the crisp white slide Serena had created appeared, the black text stark and brutally clear. The property, located at 1200 Westfall Tower, floors 48, 49, and 50, is held in the irrevocable Sterling Family Trust, with Serena Sterling as the sole and exclusive beneficiary and legal owner. All leasing agreements are subject to her sole discretion. Jacob was still smiling, his arm around Isabel, when the first person in the audience read the words and audibly gasped. Another pointed. A low murmur swelled into a confused roar. Jacob's smile faltered. He glanced behind him, his brow furrowed in annoyance, expecting a technical glitch. He read the words. Once. Twice. The color drained from his face. It was as if the stage lights had bleached him of all life and confidence. His arm dropped from Isabel's waist. She looked at him confused and then followed his horrified gaze to the screen. Her expression of triumph curdled into bewilderment. Jacob. What is that? What does that mean? But Jacob couldn't answer. His world, so meticulously constructed, was imploding in real time. He stared out at the crowd, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a man who had just been electrocuted. And then a new sound cut through the chaos. The soft, steady click of heels on the marble floor. Serena had risen from her seat. With an almost chilling grace, she walked towards the stage, her clutch containing the original deed held in her hand. The crowd parted for her as if she were Moses parting the Red Sea. Every eye in the room was on her. She was no longer the scorned wife. She was an executioner. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage and stopped a few feet from the stunned couple. She didn't look at Isabel. Her focus was entirely on her husband. A beautiful speech, Jacob, she said, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the still active microphone. The entire room fell silent, straining to hear. Truly. A new dawn, a new beginning. It's all very inspiring. She took a step closer. There's just one small piece of administrative work to clear up before you and... Isabel. She said the name as if it were a foreign object in her mouth, can lead this new dawn. She opened her clutch and pulled out the blue folder. She didn't open it. She simply held it up for him to see. You seem to be under a slight misapprehension about whose headquarters this is. Jacob stared at the folder, then at her face. The shock was finally giving way to a desperate, panicked anger. Serena, don't do this, he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper. Not here. Here. It was you who chose the venue, Jacob, she replied, her voice never rising, never betraying the raging inferno of hurt inside her. You chose to humiliate me in front of our friends, our colleagues, the governor. You wanted a public spectacle. So you're getting one. The difference is, this one is based on facts, not fantasies. She finally turned her gaze to Isabel, whose face was now a mask of dawning horror. The adoration was gone, replaced by confusion and fear. Miss Rosie Serena, said, her tone professional, almost detached. You were introduced as the future of this company. But a successful analyst, which I'm told you are, should always practice due diligence before entering into a partnership. You see the asset you thought you were acquiring. She gestured vaguely at Jacob. Comes with certain liabilities. And the foundation you plan to build your future on, she swept her hand to encompass the opulent room, is in fact my property. She turned back to Jacob. My father taught me that the first rule of business is to know your assets. You of all people should know that. He also taught me the second rule: never ever tolerate a liability that threatens the entire enterprise. She took the folder and placed it gently on the podium. This is the original deed. As the sole owner, I am exercising my discretionary rights under the trust agreement. The current lease held by Hayes Ascendancy Partners is hereby terminated effective immediately. A new wave of shock washed over the audience. Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer, stepped forward from the crowd. "I can attest to the legality of this document and Mrs. Sterling's rights as owner," he announced in a firm, clear voice. Serena looked at Jacob, whose face had collapsed into a mess of disbelief and fury. "So, by all means, Jacob, continue. Tell us more about your new beginning. You'll just have to have it somewhere else. I want you, your personal effects, and your future wife." She said the words with dripping scorn. "Off my property by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Security will escort you out now." She glanced to the side of the stage where the head of security was standing, his eyes wide. He looked at her, then at Jacob, and then back at her. With a decisive nod, he started moving towards the stage. Isabel finally found her voice, a choked, pathetic sound. "Jacob, you told me she knew. You told me it was over. You told me this was all yours." Jacob couldn't look at her. He could only stare at Serena, his eyes blazing with a hatred born of total and utter defeat. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and publicly castrated. The king had been dethroned in his own throne room, which had turned out to be borrowed all along. Serena didn't wait for the security guards to arrive. Her work was done. She gave one last sweeping look at the wreckage on the stage, her husband's shattered pride, his mistress's tear-streaked, horrified face, and then she turned. With her back straight and her head held high, she walked off the stage through the stunned, silent crowd and out of the ballroom without looking back. The click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound, a final, triumphant punctuation mark on the end of her marriage. The moment Serena disappeared through the grand ballroom doors, the spell of stunned silence broke, and chaos erupted. The exit of the Queen was a signal for the courtiers to flee. The governor, his face a mask of diplomatic neutrality, was the first to be discreetly whisked away by his security detail. He was followed by a flood of the city's most influential figures, bankers, investors, and clients who wanted to be as far away from the radioactive fallout as possible. The stench of scandal was bad for business. On stage, Jacob Hayes stood paralyzed, a statue of impotent rage. The security guards had reached him, two large, impassive men in sharp suits. One of them, a man named George, who had worked the building for years, spoke in a low, respectful but firm voice. "Mr. Hayes, I think it's time to go." The address, Mr. Hayes, not Sir, was a subtle but clear shift. The power in the room had transferred. Isabel finally snapped. She turned on Jacob, her voice a shrill cry of betrayal. "You lied to me. You lied about everything, her property, terminating the lease." "What the hell is going on, Jacob? You told me she was nothing, a society wife. You were divorcing." Jacob finally broke from his trance, grabbing her arm. "Shut up, Isabel. Just shut up," he snarled, his voice a venomous whisper. He was no longer the charismatic leader. He was a cornered animal. He looked from her face to the sea of departing backs to the damning text still glowing on the screen behind him. His empire had been decapitated with a single perfectly executed blow. "Don't you touch me!" Isabel shrieked, pulling her arm away. The illusion of their grand romance had been shattered, revealing the ugly transactional framework beneath. She wasn't his great love. She was his co-conspirator in a failed coup. And she was about to be unemployed and publicly branded as a homewrecker. "You've ruined me!" Jacob ignored her. His mind was racing, scrambling for a foothold in the landslide. "This is illegal!" he suddenly yelled, his voice cracking with desperation, addressing the remaining gawking employees. "She can't do this! This is company property! We have a lease from the floor!" Arthur Pendleton's calm voice cut through the noise. "The lease you have, Mr. Hayes, is with the Sterling Family Trust, not Mrs. Sterling directly. And Clause 17B, which I'm sure you overlooked, allows the trustee to terminate the agreement without cause in the event of actions that bring disrepute upon the property or the trust itself. I'd say this qualifies. Jacob's face went white. He knew it was over. He had signed those documents a decade ago, barely reading the boilerplate language about the property, so eager was he to get his hands on the sterling money and connections. He had been so focused on the cash that he'd missed the cage that came with it. Defeated, he allowed the guards to lead him off the stage. As he passed the podium, his eyes fell on the blue folder Serena had left. In a fit of pique, he swiped at it, sending it flying. The paper spilled out the original deed, sliding across the polished floor. It was a pathetic, childish act that cemented his fall from grace in the eyes of the few who remained. Isabel stood alone on the stage, the crimson of her dress now looking garish and cheap under the harsh lights. The crowd was gone. The dream was dead. She wrapped her arms around herself and began to sob, not for love, but for the future she had been so sure was hers. Meanwhile, Serena didn't go home. She went to the one place that had always been her sanctuary, her father's library, in the old Sterling mansion, which had been kept exactly as he'd left it. She walked into the cool, dark room, the scent of old leather and paper, enveloping her like a hug. She didn't turn on the lights. She simply sat in his large leather armchair, the one facing the unlit fireplace, and let the silence hold her. The adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving behind the raw, cavernous ache of betrayal. The victory felt hollow. She had won the battle, but the war had cost her 10 years of her life. She had loved Jacob, or at least she had loved the man she thought he was. She had believed in their partnership, celebrated his successes as her own. To discover that in his eyes she was merely an obstacle to be overcome. A stepping stone to be discarded was a pain deeper than any she had ever known. Tears she had refused to shed in public began to well in her eyes. She wasn't just crying for the marriage. She was crying for the young, hopeful woman she had been, the one who had believed that love could be a partnership of equals, not a hostile takeover. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. It was a text from Arthur. "Arthur, it's done. He's gone. The staff is awaiting your instructions. What's our next move?" Serena wiped her eyes. The grief was real and she would have to navigate it. But tonight was not the night for mourning. Tonight was for securing the victory. The queen had taken the castle. Now she had to command it. She stood up and turned on a single green-shaded lamp on her father's desk. The warm light illuminated the room, chasing away the shadows. She looked at the portraits of her ancestors on the walls, stern-faced men and women who had built and protected their legacy through generations. She was one of them. She picked up her phone and began to type her reply to Arthur. Serena, instruct David Chen to lock Jacob and Isabel out of the system entirely. All access revoked. Have security box up their personal belongings. We'll send them to a storage unit. Tell the COO Robert to schedule an all-hands emergency meeting for 10 a.m. tomorrow, in the main conference room. I will be leading it. And Arthur, find me the best, most ruthless divorce attorney in the city. The war has just begun. She hit send. A new kind of resolve settled over her. Jacob had underestimated her. He had mistaken her quiet support for weakness, her love for naivete. He was about to find out what a sterling was truly made of when their back was against the wall. He had wanted a new beginning. She would give him one, a beginning from absolute zero. The following morning, the atmosphere at Hayes Ascendancy Partners was thick with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The story of the gala had spread through the city's financial district at the speed of light. Jacob Hayes, the golden boy, had been spectacularly and publicly dethroned. And the quiet, elegant wife nobody paid much attention to was now the firm's landlord, and it seemed its new de facto ruler. At precisely 10 a.m., Serena Sterling walked into the main conference room. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back, her face composed and resolute. She looked every bit the commander-in-chief. The entire senior staff, minus Isabel Rossi, was assembled. They sat in silence, avoiding eye contact with each other. Serena didn't sit at the head of the table, Jacob's chair. She remained standing, her presence commanding the room. "Good morning," she began, her voice even and strong. "I know there are many questions. Let me be clear. The ownership of this property is no longer in question. The operations of Hayes Ascendancy Partners, however, are now under review. My primary goal is to ensure the stability of this firm and to protect our clients' interests, which have been put at risk by Mr. Hayes's reckless behavior." The COO, Robert, a man who had always been a loyal sycophant to Jacob, spoke up tentatively. "Serena, Mrs. Sterling. With all due respect, Jacob built this company. His relationships are the bedrock of our client base." Serena met his gaze without flinching. "The relationships Jacob built are now a liability. What he did was not just a personal matter. It was a catastrophic failure of judgment that has exposed this firm to ridicule and instability. The bedrock, as you call it, is cracked." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Therefore, as of this morning, I have filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, and more importantly, I have petitioned the court to have Jacob's assets frozen pending a full forensic audit of the company's finances." A wave of shock rippled through the room. This went far beyond a marital spat. A forensic audit was a declaration of total war. "An audit?" Robert stammered. "That's not necessary. The books are clean." "Are they?" Serena's voice was laced with ice. "Let's hope so. Because my father didn't just teach me about real estate, Robert. He taught me how to read a balance sheet. And for the last 6 months I've noticed certain anomalies. Large, vaguely labeled consulting fees and discretionary expenses that seemed excessive even for a company as successful as this one." This was the twist. This wasn't just about the affair. Serena's suspicions had been growing for months. The distance, the late nights, she had started to dig long before she found Isabel's text message. She had quietly engaged her own accountant to look into the publicly available filings, and what she found were red flags. Now she had the power to investigate from the inside. Over the next week, the office became a battleground. Jacob, through his lawyers, fought back furiously, accusing Serena of a vindictive and illegal corporate takeover. He tried to rally support, calling senior partners and clients, painting himself as the victim of a scorned, hysterical wife. But the narrative didn't stick. The image of him on that stage publicly humiliating the woman who was the source of his seed money and the owner of his headquarters was too powerful. His support evaporated. Isabel Rossi disappeared. Her name was scrubbed from the company website. Rumor had it she had hired a lawyer and was threatening to sue Jacob for misrepresentation and wrongful termination. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and now she was left with nothing but public shame. The real drama, however, was unfolding in the numbers. The forensic accountants Serena hired were ruthless and efficient. They descended on the company's books like a pack of wolves. And they found what Serena had suspected they would. It wasn't just excessive expenses. It was systematic fraud. The discovery came from an unlikely source, David Chen, the loyal IT security head. After Serena took control, she had called him to her new office, Jacob's old office, which she'd had completely redecorated in 2 days. "David," she said, "I need to know everything. Jacob was planning something big, a new life. That costs money, more money than he was making, I suspect. Is there anything you've seen? Any hidden servers? Private email accounts?" David hesitated. His loyalty to Serena was absolute, but what she was asking him to do was cross a significant line. "Mrs. Sterling? Serena? What you're looking for would be on his private server, firewalled from the main company network. Getting in there is necessary." Serena finished. "This is no longer about my marriage. This is about potential crimes that could sink this entire company and everyone who works here. If he has stolen from this firm, he has stolen from all of us." That was all David needed to hear. The next day he came to her with a single USB drive. He was arrogant, David said quietly. He used a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, Future Dawn Enterprises. He's been siphoning funds into it for the last 18 months. He'd disguised the transfers as payments to a consulting firm. It looks like he was building a nest egg, a very large one. It was the smoking gun. Jacob hadn't just been planning to replace his wife. He had been systematically looting the company they had built together to fund his new life. The consulting fees weren't just for lavish dinners and gifts for Isabel. He was gutting the company from the inside out. He had stolen nearly $8 million. Serena sat at her father's desk that night, the evidence laid out before her. The betrayal was so much deeper than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated long-term heist. He hadn't just stopped loving her. He had actively conspired to defraud her. She thought about her options. She could use this information as leverage in the divorce, force him to walk away with nothing and handle it quietly. That would be the clean, private way to do it. But then she thought of the employees whose pensions were tied to the company's health. She thought of the clients who had trusted them. She thought of the decade of her life she had poured into this venture. A quiet settlement felt like a disservice. It felt like letting him get away with it. Her father had been a ruthless businessman, but he had never been a thief. There was a line. Jacob had crossed it. She picked up the phone and called the district attorney's office. The end for Jacob Hayes did not come with a dramatic courtroom showdown or a fiery confrontation. It arrived on a gray Tuesday morning on a nondescript sidewalk wrapped in the profound banality of consequence. He was leaving his lawyer's new office, a cramped, soulless space in a second-tier building that was a constant, humiliating reminder of his diminished status. Yet even then, a sliver of his signature arrogance remained. He believed he was a fighter, a victim of a vengeful woman's scorn. He was discussing strategies for a countersuit, clinging to the delusion that he could still somehow spin the narrative that his charisma, which had always been his greatest asset, could salvage something from the wreckage. He imagined a comeback story, a redemption arc. He was, as always, the hero of his own story. As he pushed through the glass door, adjusting the collar of a suit that now seemed to hang off his frame, two men in unremarkable jackets stepped into his path. They didn't look like threats. They looked like bureaucrats. Jacob Hayes, one of them, asked, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes," Jacob replied, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. He assumed they were process servers for another civil suit. "You're under arrest." The man held up a badge. "The charges are grand larceny, multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement." The words didn't seem to register at first. They were abstract, disconnected from his reality. Then he saw the handcuffs, cold, gleaming steel. A wave of icy dread washed over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. "This is ridiculous," he stammered, his voice losing all its practiced resonance. "This is a misunderstanding. It's a marital dispute. Your wife's testimony to the grand jury was quite clear." "Mr. Hayes," the second detective said, his voice laced with the weary disinterest of a man who had heard every excuse, as were the forensic accounting reports from the Sterling Hayes Group and the digital trail of Future Dawn Enterprises. "You have the right to remain silent." The click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was a small metallic sound that echoed like a death knell for his entire world. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the hollow, sickening realization that he had no story left to spin. He wasn't a hero. He was just a common criminal. The legal battle was a formality, an avalanche of evidence. The district attorney's office had a mountain of it, meticulously documented financial reports, sworn affidavits from the accountants, and the unassailable digital forensics provided by David Chen, which laid out the architecture of the fraud in irrefutable detail. Serena's testimony was the capstone. She took the stand not as a woman scorned, but as a CEO betrayed. Dressed in conservative navy blue, she calmly and precisely detailed Jacob's financial machinations, explaining the complex web of shell corporations and fraudulent invoices with a clarity that left the courtroom spellbound. She presented facts, not feelings, and in doing so she was more devastating than any tearful, jilted wife could ever have been. Facing an airtight case and the prospect of a decade or more in prison, Jacob crumbled. His arrogance was replaced by a desperate fear. He accepted a plea bargain, in exchange for his full cooperation and a forfeiture of all assets to repay the nearly $8 million he had stolen. His sentence was reduced. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal minimum security prison. His entire life was liquidated. The penthouse, the European sports cars, the art collection, the platinum cufflinks all sold off. The proceeds funneled back to the company he had tried to gut. Isabel Rossi, the future wife, faced her own quiet reckoning. Her threats of lawsuits against Jacob proved fruitless. He had nothing left for her to take. She was a pariah in the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered about at cocktail parties. Branded by her ambition and poor judgment, she vanished from the city. Her promising career annihilated a piece of collateral damage in the explosion of a man's ego. In the wake of the storm, Serena focused on the rebuild. She officially renamed the firm the Sterling Hayes Group. The decision was born of pure strategy. Sterling signaled the return of stability, integrity, and the solid foundation her father had built his name on. Keeping Hayes was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, a permanent public declaration that she had not destroyed the company, but had saved it from its corrupt founder. It was a brand of continuity and correction. She led with a quiet, decisive authority that was the antithesis of Jacob's flashy reign. The culture of fear and ego was replaced with one of collaboration and ethics. Clients who had been wavering returned, won over not by slick presentations, but by Serena's transparent, no-nonsense recovery plan. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur Pendleton walked into her office. The sun streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the space that was now unequivocally hers. He placed a single-bound document on her polished desk. "It's done," he said, his voice gentle. "The divorce is final." He signed everything without contest. "You are officially a free woman, Serena." Serena looked down at the document, the legal severance of a decade of her life. She felt no surge of triumph, no celebratory glee. Instead, a profound and quiet sense of peace settled deep in her bones. She walked to the window, looking down at the sprawling city. It wasn't just a view anymore. It was a landscape she now commanded. The scar of Jacob's betrayal was still there, a faint pale line on her soul, but it no longer ached. It was a reminder of the battle she had fought and won. She had been forced to burn down her life to save it. She had lost a husband she once loved, but in the ashes she had forged a new version of herself, stronger, wiser, and utterly uncompromisingly her own. The Sterling Hayes Group was not her inheritance or her husband's dream. It was the empire she had claimed, built on a foundation of truth that no one could ever take from her again. In the end, this wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was a story about power. The power we give to others and the power we forget we have within ourselves. Serena Sterling thought she was the support structure for another person's dream, only to discover she owned the entire foundation. Her journey through the darkest betrayal led her to her greatest strength, reminding us all that sometimes the most devastating endings are just the beginning of our own true story. The hum of the ultrasound machine was supposed to be the soundtrack to the happiest day of her life. They were about to see their baby for the first time. Her husband, Torrin, a man who could buy cities, held her hand, his grip like ice. As the doctor showed them the tiny beating heart, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. What a mistake. He thought his secret was safe. He thought his money could bury the truth. But he never counted on the doctor in that room, a woman who saw more than just a picture on a screen. She saw his lie, and she was about to reveal a shocking truth that would shatter a gilded world forever. The silence in the Bentley was a familiar character in their marriage. It was a heavy, opulent silence, cushioned by hand-stitched leather and the whisper-quiet engine, but a silence nonetheless. Torrin Hawthorne, her husband of 3 years, drove with an unnerving stillness, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets of New York City. His profile, sharp and handsome like a Roman coin, was a mask of serene indifference. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry, the brilliant CEO of Hawthorne Holdings, a man whose Midas touch turned every venture into gold. To Katya, he was becoming a beautiful, unknowable stranger. Their home, a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue that Torin called the Observatory, for its floor-to-ceiling windows felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every piece of art, every piece of furniture had been chosen by him. Her life, she was beginning to realize, had also been curated. She had been a promising art historian at the Met when they met. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale, dinners in Paris, surprise trips to see the Northern Lights, a blinding diamond that felt more like a beautiful handcuff. He had convinced her to leave her job. An artist needs a patron, Katya, he'd said, and a historian needs to be surrounded by history in the making. Your work is me now. It's us. And she, blinded by love and the sheer force of his personality, had agreed. Now her days were a structured series of luncheons with the wives of his business associates' charity galas, where her only role was to smile, and where his chosen designer, and long quiet afternoons, staring out at a city she lived in but no longer felt a part of. The pregnancy had been her idea, a desperate attempt to build a bridge across the growing chasm between them. She thought a baby, a piece of both of them, would force him to see her again, not just the polished accessory on his arm. When she told him, his reaction was muted. A flicker of something unreadable in his cool gray eyes, a tight smile. A Hawthorne air, he'd said the words tasting of legacy and lineage, not love and joy. We'll need to adjust the nursery plans. The ride to the renowned obstetrician Dr. Anya Sharma was no different. He hadn't wanted to come. It's the 20-week scan, Torin, she had pleaded. We'll find out the gender. It's important. He had sighed, a long-suffering sound. I have the merger with Sterling Thorne, Katya. It's a delicate phase. This is more important than Sterling Thorne. She had said, a rare spark of defiance flashing within her. His jaw had tightened. Fine. I'll move my meeting with Mr. Sterling. But let's be efficient. Now in the sterile, quiet room, the scent of antiseptic cleaner sharp in the air, that efficiency was all he radiated. He checked his Patek Philippe watch twice while the technician prepped her. Katya lay on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her, her stomach bare and covered in a cold, clear gel. Dr. Sharma entered with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was a sharp, observant woman in her late 40s with a reputation for being one of the best. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne. Ready for the big show. Ready as we'll ever be, Katya said, trying to inject some lightness into the room. Torin simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the large monitor. The technician, a young woman named Chloe, moved the transducer across Katya's belly. A monochrome world swirled into existence on the screen. It was abstract at first, a collection of shadows and light. Then Chloe pointed, and there we are. See that little flicker? That's the heartbeat. Strong and steady. Tears instantly welled in Katya's eyes. A tiny, pulsating light in the darkness. It was real. A life. Her baby. She turned to Torin, her heart overflowing, expecting to see a reflection of her own awe. His face was stone. He wasn't looking at the heartbeat. He was looking at the vague outline of a tiny head, the curve of a minuscule spine. His hand, which had been resting limply on hers, tightened. She thought it was a gesture of shared emotion until he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. The warmth of his breath was a stark contrast to the icy cruelty of his words. It's a mistake. The whisper was so low, so venomous, it was like a snake bite. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. The hum of the machine, the doctor's cheerful commentary, surely she'd imagined it. But then she saw the subtle shift in his jaw, the cold finality in his eyes as he looked away from the screen and stared at a blank spot on the wall. He had said it. He had looked at their child, their miracle, and declared it a mistake. The air rushed out of her lungs. The tears that had been tears of joy turned to ash, burning her cheeks. Her hand went cold in his. The room which had felt full of life and promise a moment before was suddenly a tomb. Dr. Sharma and Chloe were oblivious, their professional chatter filling the void. Everything looks perfect, Katya. Limbs are all there. Measurements are right on track. Do you want to know the gender? Her voice was a strangled whisper. I don't know. Torin released her hand and stood up, smoothing his bespoke suit jacket. I have to take a call. The Sterling-Thorne merger won't wait. He looked at Dr. Sharma, a mask of polite apology firmly in place. Doctor, please send the bill to my office. Katya, my driver, Thomas, will take you home. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the screen again. He just walked out, leaving her half-naked on a paper-lined table with the ghost of his words echoing in the silent spaces of her heart. A mistake. Her baby. Their baby. A mistake. Dr. Sharma's cheerful demeanor had vanished. She looked from the empty doorway back to Katya's tear-streaked face. She turned to Chloe. Chloe, could you give Mrs. Hawthorne some privacy to get dressed? And please hold all my calls for the next 15 minutes. Once Chloe had left Dr. Chasur, Sharma pulled a stool over her expression, a mixture of professional concern and something deeper. Something intensely human. She saw the devastation. She had to have seen Torin's chilling detachment. Katya, she said softly, her voice a lifeline. Deep breaths. Can you tell me what happened just now? Katya shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. He said. She couldn't repeat it. Saying it out loud would make it irrevocably real. Dr. Sharma didn't press. She simply placed a comforting hand on Katya's arm. Torin's reaction was unusual, especially for a first-time father. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held Katya's. I have been a patient of the Hawthorne family's preferred hospital network for years. Torin's medical file is extensive. I took the liberty of reviewing it before this appointment as a matter of due diligence. Katya frowned, confused. His medical file? Why, doctor? Sharma hesitated, as if weighing her next words on a scale of professional ethics versus human decency. There was a notation from his primary care physician, a Dr. Alistair Finch, to cross-reference his records with any spousal maternity care. It was an odd flag, so I looked into it. She took a deep breath. Katya, what I'm about to tell you is a serious breach of patient confidentiality. But given what I just witnessed, I believe it is a matter of your safety and well-being. A cold dread far colder than the ultrasound gel seeped into Katya's bones. What is it? Torin had a severe case of mumps as a teenager? She began, her voice low and steady. It was complicated by a condition called orchitis, inflammation of the testicles. The medical terms meant little to Katya. She was still stuck on the word mistake. The inflammation caused significant irreparable damage. Dr. Sharma continued, her gaze unwavering. We ran a series of tests on him afterward. I have the records here. Katya, Torin Hawthorne is and has been since he was 16 years old completely and irreversibly sterile. His condition is called azoospermia. There is a 0% chance that he can conceive a child naturally. The room began to spin. The black and white image of her baby on the screen seemed to mock her. 0% chance. Sterile. Irreversible. What are you saying? She stammered, her mind refusing to connect the dots. Dr. Sharma's voice was gentle, but her words were devastatingly clear. I'm saying, Katya, that Torin knows he cannot be the father of your baby. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a gunshot. His muted reaction to the pregnancy, his distance, his controlling nature, and the whisper. It's a mistake. The mistake wasn't the baby. The mistake wasn't the pregnancy. The mistake was that she had gotten pregnant at all, because he knew with absolute scientific certainty that he wasn't the father. He hadn't been accusing the baby of being a mistake. He had been accusing her. The drive home from Dr. Sharma's office was a blur. Thomas Torran's stoic driver navigated through the city traffic with his usual silent competence, occasionally glancing at Katya in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with what might have been concern. She sat numbly in the back of the Bentley, the plush leather feeling like a cage. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, a gesture that was now fraught with a terrifying new meaning. Dr. Sharma's words echoed in her mind, a relentless, deafening drumbeat. Sterile. Irreversible. 0% chance. The doctor had been kind. She had given Katya a glass of water, a box of tissues, and the space to let the initial shock wash over her. She had also given her a warning. A man like Torran Hawthorne, with his resources and his pride. He will not take this revelation lightly, Katya. He is not a man who likes his narrative to be challenged. Be careful. She had printed a copy of the diagnostic report from Torran's file, a document dated over a decade ago, signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch, detailing the diagnosis of azoospermia. Proof is your only power now, she'd said, sliding it into a plain manila envelope. Guard this with your life. Back in the sterile perfection of the observatory, Katya walked through the cavernous living room like a ghost. The Warhol prints on the wall seemed to scream in silent mockery. The cityscape outside, usually a source of comfort, felt alien and menacing. Her whole life, this beautiful, curated life, was a lie, a meticulously constructed sham. She had not cheated on Torran. Not once. The very idea was absurd. She loved him, or she had loved the man she thought he was. Her mind raced frantically, trying to find an explanation. Any explanation other than the one staring her in the face. A miracle. A misdiagnosis. A 1 in a billion chance. But Dr. Sharma's certainty had been absolute. The proof was in the envelope clutched in her hand. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, then how was she pregnant? The question was a black hole threatening to swallow her whole. Torran came home late that evening. She heard his keys in the door, the soft click as he locked it behind him. She was sitting in the dark, the envelope on the marble coffee table in front of her. She hadn't moved for hours. He switched on a low lamp and the room was bathed in a soft golden glow. He loosened his tie, his movements fluid and confident. Katya. Why are you sitting in the dark? He didn't sound angry, just weary. The powerful CEO home from a long day of empire building. We need to talk, Torran, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. Can it wait? The Sterling Thorne deal is at a critical juncture. I'm exhausted. No, she said, her voice gaining strength. It can't wait. She gestured to the envelope. I had a very enlightening conversation with Dr. Sharma today, after you left. A flicker of something, anger, fear, crossed his face before being instantly suppressed, replaced by a look of paternalistic concern. He walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her, creating a deliberate distance between them. Are you all right? Is the baby okay? You seemed overwrought at the clinic. The casual cruelty of his words, the way he pretended her distress was just hormonal imbalance, ignited a fire in her chest. The baby is fine. But you know that, don't you? You saw the heartbeat. You also called our baby a mistake. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Katya, you misheard. The room was noisy. I was talking about the merger. Don't lie to me, Torran, she said, her voice rising. Don't you dare lie to me. I heard you perfectly, and now I know why you said it. She pushed the envelope across the table. Dr. Sharma showed me this. Your medical file. From when you were 16. He glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips, and the mask of the concerned husband dissolved, revealing the monster beneath. It was a chilling transformation. Dr. Sharma seems to have a problem with patient confidentiality, he said smoothly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. I'll have my legal team address that with the hospital board. She'll be lucky to practice medicine in this state again. This isn't about Dr. Sharma. This is about you, about us." Katya was on her feet now, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You're sterile, Torin. You have been for years. You knew you couldn't be this baby's father. You let me believe. You let me think I was going crazy." "Why?" He stood up, his height and presence suddenly overwhelming in the dimly lit room. He was no longer the charming man she had married. He was a predator. "I didn't let you believe anything, Katya," he purred, taking a step towards her. "I reacted to a simple biological fact. You came to me, told me you were pregnant. I am your husband. What was I to conclude?" The implication hit her like a physical blow. You think I cheated on you." He gave a small, dismissive shrug. "The science is quite clear. I cannot have children. You are having a child. The conclusion is elementary, my dear. I was willing for the sake of appearances to overlook your indiscretion, to raise the child as my own, to give it the Hawthorne name, the Hawthorne legacy. All I asked for was your discretion. But you couldn't even manage that. You had to create this drama. It was gaslighting of the highest order. So complete, so audacious that for a moment she almost questioned her own reality. He was twisting her fidelity into a betrayal, her joy into a scandal. He was painting himself as the magnanimous, cuckolded husband willing to forgive her transgression for the sake of his name. The mistake he'd referred to wasn't just her pregnancy, it was her failure to keep the secret of her affair. "I never cheated on you," she whispered, horrified. "I would never." "Then how do you explain it?" He shot back, his voice like a whip. "A divine, immaculate conception. Did an angel visit you while I was closing the deal in Tokyo?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "I don't know. That's what I'm asking you, but I know I was faithful to you." He laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of humor. "Fidelity, a quaint concept. It doesn't matter anymore. You've made it matter. By bringing this out into the open, you've forced my hand." He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. "You will carry this child. When it is born, you will sign over all parental rights to me. I will have a non-disclosure agreement drawn up, a very generous one. You will be well compensated for your services. Then you will disappear. You will move to Europe or California, I don't care. You will never contact me or the child again." Katya stared at him aghast. "You want to buy my baby? You want me to give you my child and just leave?" "It's not your child," he said, turning to face her, his eyes like chips of ice. "Genetically, it is half yours. But it will be a Hawthorne. It will be raised as my heir. You are merely the vessel, a very beautiful but ultimately disappointing vessel." The cruelty was breathtaking. He was systematically dismantling her identity, wife, partner, and now mother. She was nothing to him but a means to an end, an incubator for an heir he desperately needed but couldn't produce himself. Her mind reeled back to the central, impossible question. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, the answer had to lie somewhere in the space between those two truths. And Torin, in his arrogance, had just given her a clue. He wasn't surprised by the pregnancy. He was angry it had become complicated. He had a plan already in place. This wasn't a shock to him. This was an inconvenience. Her fear began to morph into something else. A cold, hard resolve. He was a liar. He was a manipulator. And he had underestimated her. "No," she said, the word tasting of newfound power. He raised an eyebrow. "No, no. I will not give you my child. I will not disappear. And I will find out the truth." For the first time since she'd met him, Torin Hawthorne looked genuinely surprised. He studied her for a long moment, a predator reassessing its prey. Then he smiled again, that same chilling, empty smile. "You have nothing, Katya," he said softly. "You signed a prenuptial agreement that leaves you with exactly what you came with, which was nothing. You have no job. Your friends are my friends. Your family is—" "Where exactly?" "That brother you never speak to. You live in my home. You eat my food. You wear my clothes. You are nothing without me. Do not make the mistake of thinking you can fight me. It's a battle you will lose. Miserably. He finished his whiskey and placed the glass down with a decisive click. The offer stands until the day you give birth. Think carefully about your next move, because I will be thinking about mine. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the silence. But this time the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the clarion call of war. He was right about one thing. She had a brother. A brother she hadn't spoken to in years because he'd seen the monster in Torin long before she had. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. She scrolled through the contacts past the names of society wives and charity organizers until she found the one she was looking for, Liam Vance, her estranged, brilliant lawyer brother, her only hope. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding against her ribs. He answered on the second ring. Katja. His voice was full of surprise. They hadn't spoken since her wedding day when he'd pulled her aside and begged her not to marry Torin. He's a shark, Katja. He'll eat you alive. She had called him jealous and dramatic. Liam, she sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking. Liam, I need your help. You were right. You were right about everything. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. Katja. What's wrong? Where are you? Liam's voice had shed its surprise and was now sharp with concern. I'm at home. At the penthouse, she choked out between sobs. Liam, I'm in trouble. I'm pregnant and Torin. I'm on my way. He cut in. No hesitation. Don't say anything else over the phone. Are you safe right now? Is he there? He's here, but in his study. I'm okay for now. Lock your bedroom door. Don't talk to him. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Just hang on, Katja. I'm coming. The line went dead. For the first time in hours, a tiny sliver of hope pierced through Katja's terror. Liam had always been her protector. Growing up, he was the one who'd patched up her scraped knees and stood up to bullies. He'd gone to Columbia Law while she'd pursued art history at NYU. Their paths diverged, but the bond had been unbreakable until Torin had systematically severed it, framing Liam's protectiveness as jealousy and disapproval of his wealth. He can't stand to see you happy, Katja, Torin had said, and she, a fool, had believed him. True to his word, 30 minutes later the intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. Mr. Hawthorne, a Mr. Liam Vance is here to see you. The doorman, of course, assumed Liam was here to see the man of the house. Torin's voice came over the internal speaker, cold and clipped. I'm not expecting a Mr. Vance. Send him away. Her blood ran cold. He was trying to isolate her completely. She grabbed her phone and texted Liam frantically. He won't let you up. He's trying to block me in. Liam's reply was almost instant. Go to the service elevator at the end of the hall. Now! Her heart hammered against her ribs. The service elevator was used by catering staff and maintenance. Torin would never think to monitor it. She slipped out of the living room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. She could hear Torin on a phone call in his study, his voice a low, angry murmur. She crept down the long hallway past the gallery of curated art, her hand still protectively on her belly. The service elevator was utilitarian and stark. She jabbed the button and prayed. The doors slid open with a quiet hum, and there stood Liam. He looked older than she remembered. His sandy hair was a little shorter, and there were fine lines around his eyes. But those eyes were the same, fiercely intelligent and full of a protective warmth that she suddenly realized she had been starved of for 3 years. He pulled her into a hug, and she clung to him, the sobs she'd been suppressing finally breaking free. It's okay, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. I've got you. Let's get out of here. They rode the elevator down in silence. He led her out a back exit into a grimy alley she'd never known existed, a world away from the polished lobby of Park Avenue. The cold night air was a shock to her system. He hailed a yellow cab and soon they were speeding away, the glittering lights of her prison shrinking in the distance. Liam's apartment in Greenwich Village was the complete antithesis of her penthouse. It was cluttered with books, legal pads, and a friendly-looking ficus tree. It smelled of coffee and old paper. It felt real. He sat her down on a worn leather sofa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and made her a cup of tea. As she sipped the hot, sweet liquid, the story came tumbling out. She told him everything. The ultrasound, Torrens' whisper, Dr. Sharma's revelation, the medical report which she'd had the presence of mind to shove into her purse, the horrifying confrontation, the gaslighting Torrens' ultimatum to take her baby and disappear. Liam listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. He took the medical report and read it carefully, his lawyerly gaze missing nothing. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice a low growl. "I knew he was a controlling bastard, but this is sociopathic." He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own. "Katya, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "He's a master manipulator. He isolated me and I let him." Liam shook his head. "No more. That ends tonight. First things first, he can't force you to give up your child. Parental rights are not a commodity to be bought and sold. His threats are designed to terrorize you into submission. But he has so much power, Liam. The best lawyers, the judges. He told me he'd ruin Dr. Sharma." "He'll try," Liam said, his jaw tight. "But Dr. Sharma has ethics on her side, and a good lawyer, which I will make sure she has, can argue that her duty of care to you, a patient in clear distress, superseded her duty of confidentiality to him, especially when he was using that confidentiality to perpetrate fraud and emotional abuse." He started pacing his mind, clearly working. "The prenup is another issue. Torrens' legal team is the best money can buy. They would have made it ironclad. He's right that you'd likely walk away with very little. But we're not going after his money. We're going for something more important, your freedom, your child, and the truth." He stopped and looked at her. "Katya, this is critical. You said you never cheated." "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "I believe you," he said immediately. "Which leaves a gaping hole in the middle of this. You are pregnant. He is sterile. He knew he was sterile. Yet he wasn't entirely surprised by the pregnancy. He was just angry it became public knowledge between you. He already had a plan to take the baby. This suggests he was expecting a child. Just not in this messy way." Her own thoughts, which had been a chaotic storm, began to clear as Liam laid them out with such logical precision. He was expecting a child. She repeated the idea, solidifying. "So, how?" "There are ways," Liam said, starting to list them on his fingers. "Surrogacy, for one. But you're the one who's pregnant, so that's out. Adoption possible, but the timeline doesn't fit. That leaves assisted reproductive technology. IVF. The acronym hung in the air. In vitro fertilization. But IVF, with what she asked, confused. His sperm is non-viable." "Exactly," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with a hunter's intensity. "It would have to be with donor sperm." "But you would know if you went through an IVF cycle, Katya. The hormone injections, the procedures. You'd know." She shook her head. "No, nothing like that ever happened." They were silent for a moment, both staring at the impossible puzzle. A pregnancy without intercourse with a fertile partner, and without a clinical IVF procedure. It made no sense. Unless... Liam began slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Unless the insemination happened without your knowledge." The blood drained from her face. "What? How is that even possible?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It sounds like something out of a spy novel. But with a man like Torren, A man with infinite resources and a complete lack of a moral compass. We can't rule anything out. We have to start thinking like he does. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where could he have intervened? He grabbed a legal pad and a pen. Okay, let's be systematic. Think back. Katya, any unusual medical appointments? Procedures? Even a routine checkup that felt off? Any new vitamins or medications he insisted you take? She racked her brain, replaying the last 9 months in her head. Torin was obsessed with their health, but she had always seen it as part of his controlling nature. He'd switched her gynecologist about a year ago to a private clinic. He'd vetted a place called the Westwood Wellness Clinic, run by a Dr. Lena Hansen. It was exclusive, expensive, and catered to the city's elite. She'd had her annual checkup there. There was my annual pap smear at the Westwood Clinic, she said slowly. About 9 months ago. It was routine. Dr. Hansen was very professional, very slick. Anything else? Torin started me on a new regimen of prenatal vitamins about a month before that, she recalled. He had them specially formulated by a compounding pharmacy in Switzerland. He said they were the purest, most effective ones available. Liam wrote it all down. Westwood Wellness Clinic. Dr. Lena Hansen. Swiss vitamins. He looked up at her. It's a long shot, Katya, but this is where we start digging. We need to find out who owns Westwood, who Dr. Hansen is connected to, and we need to get our hands on one of those vitamin bottles. He looked at the blanket draped over her, at her exhausted, tear-stained face. His expression softened. But first you need to rest. You're safe here. Torin doesn't know this address. I moved 3 years ago after the wedding. The unspoken words hung in the air after she chose him over her brother. Tomorrow, Liam said, his voice firm with resolve, we start fighting back, and our first objective is a strategic retreat. You can't go back to the penthouse. We need to get your essential belongings, your passport, your personal documents, anything of sentimental value. We have to do it fast before he realizes you've bolted and locks everything down. The thought of going back into that gilded cage even for a moment filled her with dread. But Liam was right. She couldn't let Torin erase every trace of her existence. He'll be at his office all morning, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He has a board meeting. He'll be gone from 8 a.m. to at least noon. Liam nodded. Okay, we have a 4-hour window. We go in, we get your things, and we get out. And then we disappear while I start digging into Mr. Torin Hawthorne's beautifully curated world. I have a feeling we're about to find some very ugly secrets hidden in the fine print. That night, huddled on Liam's sofa, Katya finally slept. It was a restless sleep, punctuated by nightmares of cold whispers and icy smiles. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in the dark. She had an ally, and they had a plan. The great Torin Hawthorne had made a critical error. He had pushed her so far that she had nothing left to lose, and in doing so, he had transformed his polished, docile wife into an adversary. He had no idea the war he had just started. The next morning, the city was shrouded in a gray, determined drizzle that matched Katya's mood. Liam had already been up for hours, a pot of strong coffee brewing, his laptop open on the dining table, which was now Command Central. I did a preliminary search on the Westwood Wellness Clinic, he said, handing her a mug. It's a private entity owned by a holding company called Ethelred Capital. Very opaque. But I found something interesting. The listed agent for Ethelred is a law firm, Sloan, Finch & Associates. The name hit her like a jolt. Finch. The doctor who signed Torin's sterility report was Dr. Alistair Finch. Exactly, Liam said, his eyes glinting. It could be a coincidence, but in this world, I don't believe in them. It seems Dr. Finch didn't just diagnose Torin. He may have stayed in the family's orbit, or at least his firm did. The connection was chilling. The doctor who knew Torin's most profound secret was linked to the clinic where she had her last checkup before the pregnancy. It felt like a deliberate, carefully woven web. "We have to go," she said, her resolve hardening. "The clock is ticking." Liam had arranged for a discreet car service, not a yellow cab. "Torrin will have eyes," he'd said. "Assume we're being watched." The journey back to Park Avenue was fraught with a new kind of terror. This wasn't her home anymore. It was enemy territory. She was a spy on a mission. As planned, Torrin's Bentley was gone from the private garage. They used the service elevator again. Liam carried 2 large empty duffel bags. "Essentials only, Katya," he cautioned as they stepped into the silent, opulent foyer. "Documents, sentimental items, clothes you can't live without. Nothing he can track. Leave the jewelry he bought you. It's just another set of chains." The penthouse was eerily quiet. It was as if the argument from the night before had been sucked into the expensive upholstery, leaving behind a charged, toxic residue. While Liam stood watch at the door, Katya flew into action. She went straight to their bedroom, a vast space of cool grays and chrome that had always felt more like a hotel suite than a sanctuary. She grabbed her passport, her birth certificate, and a small box of old family photos from her bedside table. She packed jeans, sweaters, and sensible shoes, the clothes of the woman she used to be before Torrin had dressed her up like a doll. She left the designer gowns and jewel-encrusted heels hanging in the closet like the shed skin of a former life. Then her eyes fell on the ensuite bathroom. On the marble countertop sat a sleek silver bottle. "Vie éternelle prenatal formula," the elegant script read. "Torrin's specially compounded Swiss vitamins." Her heart pounded. She grabbed the bottle along with a sealed, unopened one from the medicine cabinet. This could be the proof they needed. Her final stop was Torrin's study. It was a place she rarely entered, his sanctum sanctorum. The room was dark paneled in mahogany and smelled of leather and his expensive cologne. It was the heart of his empire and his secrets. "Katya, we need to go," Liam whispered from the doorway. "Just 1 minute," she said, her instincts screaming at her. She went behind his massive desk. She didn't know what she was looking for. His computer was password protected. But in his top desk drawer beneath a stack of neatly organized papers was a slim leather-bound folio. It wasn't a company document. It looked private. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first page was a contract, a service agreement between Torrin Hawthorne and a company she'd never heard of, the Genesis Clinic. Her eyes scanned the legalese until they landed on a phrase that made the air freeze in her lungs. "For services rendered in the procurement and cryopreservation of donor gametes." Donor gametes. Sperm. She flipped the page. It was a profile. A donor profile. Donor 734. It listed his physical characteristics: height, hair color, eye color, all remarkably similar to Torrin's. It listed his academic achievements and a clean bill of health. But the name was redacted, blacked out with a thick marker. Then she saw the payment schedule, a series of large wire transfers from a private account of Torrin's to the Genesis Clinic. And below that, a second set of payments. A monthly retainer paid to a woman, Serafina Dubois. The memo line for each payment was the same consulting fee. Who was Serafina Dubois? A consultant for what? And why was Torrin paying a fertility clinic for donor sperm when he was supposedly trying to have a baby with his wife, Katya? Now Liam's voice was urgent. She snapped a picture of every page with her phone, her hands shaking so badly the first few were blurry. She shoved the folio back in the drawer and ran out of the study, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. As they were about to leave, the main elevator dinged. Her blood turned to ice. It couldn't be Torrin. He was at his board meeting. The elevator doors slid open and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. Her face was a mask of aristocratic disdain. It was Jessamine Hawthorne, Torrin's mother. She surveyed the scene, Katya clutching a purse, Liam holding 2 duffel bags, and her thin lips curled into a semblance of a smile. It didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Well, well," she said, her voice as crisp and brittle as old money. "Leaving so soon, Katya? And with your brother, the little radical?" I see Torrin's assessment of the situation was, as always, astute. Liam stepped in front of Katya protectively. Mrs. Hawthorne, we're leaving. Jessamyn's gaze swept over him dismissively before landing back on Katya. Are you foolish little girl. Did you really think you could just walk away? Did you think my family would allow a complication like you to disrupt everything? This has nothing to do with you, Jessamyn, Katya said, finding her voice. Oh, but it has everything to do with me, she replied, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume, Jean Patou's Joy, filled the air, a cloying, suffocating fragrance. A legacy is at stake. The Hawthorne name, my grandchild. Her eyes dropped to Katya's stomach and her expression softened into something that for a terrifying moment looked like warmth. You don't have to run, dear. We can be reasonable. Torrin is angry, yes. He is proud. But he can be managed. I can talk to him. She opened her handbag and pulled out a checkbook. You are carrying a Hawthorne. That makes you important to us. But you are not equipped to be its mother. Give us the child. I will personally see to it that you are set up for life. A new name, a beautiful home in the south of France. Anything you desire. You can live out your days in comfort. All you have to do is sign the papers after the birth and walk away. It was the same offer Torrin had made, but coated in a veneer of matriarchal concern that was somehow more repulsive. She wasn't just offering to buy the baby. She was offering Katya a golden cage in exchange for her soul. He is not a Hawthorne, Katya said, her voice shaking with rage. I don't know who he is, but he is not a Hawthorne, and he is my son. Mine. He is not for sale. Jessamyn's mask of civility crumbled. Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with a venomous fury that was so much like her son's. You ungrateful little tramp! You come into my son's life with nothing, and this is how you repay him, by opening your legs to some stranger and trying to pass off your bastard child as his. That's enough, Liam said, his voice deadly calm. We're done here. He took Katya's arm and steered her toward the service elevator. Jessamyn's voice followed them down the hall, shrill and laced with panic. You won't get away with this. Torrin will find you. He will take that child from you, and he will leave you with nothing. You will be ruined. Do you hear me? Ruined. The service elevator doors slid shut, cutting off her tirade. Katya collapsed against the wall, trembling uncontrollably. She had known Torrin was a monster, but now she knew the monstrosity was inherited. The entire Hawthorne family was rotten to the core. They didn't care about a child. They cared about an heir, a commodity. Back in the car, speeding away from that life for good, Katya showed Liam the photos on her phone. He scrolled through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Genesis Clinic, he muttered. Donor 734. Serafina Dubois. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a chilling realization. Katya, this is darker than we imagined. He wasn't just hiding his sterility. He had a plan, an elaborate premeditated plan to create an heir using a donor, and he was going to pass the child off as his own. But how did I get pregnant? She cried, the question still tormenting her. If I didn't have IVF, how did the donor sperm? Liam looked at the picture of the vitamin bottle, then back at the legal documents on the phone. I don't know for sure, he said slowly, his voice grim. But I have a sickening theory. It's called cryptic insemination. It's highly unethical, illegal in most places, and almost impossible to prove. But for a man with Torrin's resources and connections to Dr. Finch's network and a private clinic, he wouldn't need your consent if he could bypass it entirely. The implication was horrifying. The vitamins from Switzerland. The private clinic. Dr. Hansen. Had her routine checkup been anything but? Had she been inseminated like livestock without her knowledge or consent? It was a violation so profound she couldn't wrap her mind around it. Now we have a name. Liam said, his voice like steel. Serafina Dubois. She's the key. We find her. We find out her role in all this, and we find out the identity of donor 734. He looked at Katya, his hand covering hers. This is our new mission. We're not just escaping Katya. We're hunting. They went to ground, retreating to a secluded family cabin in the Catskills. The isolation was a balm to Katya's fractured nerves. While she focused on her health, Liam converted the rustic living room into a war room. He hired a sharp private investigator, an ex-cop named Marcus Thorne, who began charting the dark constellation of Torrens' deceit, the doctors, the clinics, and the mysterious Serafina Dubois. The first breakthrough came from the unopened bottle of Swiss vitamins. Liam had it sent to a lab for analysis. The results were sickening. It's worse than we thought, Liam said, his face grim as he read the report. The pills weren't just nutrients. They contained a powerful sedative and a cocktail of hormones designed to optimize fertility. The clinical words painted a horrifying picture. He was drugging me, Katya whispered, the violation stealing her breath. She had been an unwilling participant in her own pregnancy. Her anger, once a spark, now hardened into cold, unbreakable resolve. Soon after, Marcus Thorne's investigation bore fruit. The money trail laundered through shell corporations led him to Serafina Dubois. He found her address in a discreet Soho apartment building. I have to see her, Katya declared, her voice firm. The time for hiding was over. They approached with caution. While Liam and Marcus waited nearby, Katya went to the building alone, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She buzzed the apartment. My name is Katya Hawthorne, she said into the intercom, her voice clear. We need to talk about Torren. After a tense silence, the lock clicked open. The woman who answered the door. Serafina was not the cold accomplice Katya had envisioned. She was elegant, with intelligent, weary eyes that held a universe of regret. Mrs. Hawthorne, she said softly, I knew this day would come. Please come in. Inside the minimalist apartment, the truth finally spilled out. I was a geneticist. Serafina began, her hands trembling. I ran a fertility clinic called Genesis. Torren came to me years ago, obsessed with having a biological heir he knew he could never produce. When I told him it was impossible, he changed the plan. He wanted a child that appeared to be his, using a donor who was a perfect physical match. Donor 734. Katya breathed. Serafina nodded. But that wasn't enough for him. He insisted the child be carried by you to complete the illusion. I told him it was illegal, a monstrous ethical breach. But he had leveraged my brother's gambling debts. Torren paid them, and in return he owned me. He forced me to orchestrate everything. The drugged vitamins, the procedure. Dr. Hansen at the Westwood Clinic was one of his puppets, too. Her voice broke. I am so sorry. I've lived with this guilt every day. The confession was damning, but one final crucial question remained. Who was the donor? Katya asked, her voice trembling. Who is my baby's father? A fresh wave of fear washed over Serafina's face. Torren's cruelty has layers, she explained. He wanted the donor to be someone he could control completely, an insurance policy. He chose his younger brother, Michael. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Michael Hawthorne, the disowned artist, the family disgrace. Torren despised him, Serafina whispered. He found Michael, offered him life-changing money to be the donor, and forced him to sign an NDA and disappear. It was his ultimate twisted victory to use the genetics of the brother he hated to create the heir he would raise as his own. Armed with Serafina's sworn affidavit, Liam's team moved swiftly. They located Michael Hawthorne living a quiet, anonymous life in a small town on the coast of Maine. He was a painter of melancholic seascapes, a man haunted by a deal he had never fully understood. Katya traveled to Maine to meet him. Standing on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the Atlantic, she saw a man who shared Torren's frame, but none of his menace. His eyes were kind. They were her baby's eyes. "I am so sorry," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "I never knew." In that moment, standing beside the stranger, who was the biological father of her child, Katja felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. He was not a ghost. He was family. The final confrontation was not a dramatic showdown, but a swift legal execution. Liam presented Torin's lawyers with their arsenal, Serafina's testimony, the lab reports, Michael's statement, and the threat of criminal charges for assault and unlawful insemination. The story, if made public, would not just tarnish the Hawthorne name, it would obliterate the entire empire. Jessamine Hawthorne attempted a desperate smear campaign, but against the mountain of evidence it was useless. Faced with total ruin, Torin folded. The divorce was quiet and absolute. The fraudulent prenup was voided, and Katja accepted a settlement that would ensure her child's security. She refused to take a penny more of his blood money. Torin relinquished all paternal rights in exchange for their silence on Michael's identity, a final pathetic attempt to control a narrative he had already lost. Katja walked away from the marriage with her freedom, her dignity, and the precious life inside her. 2 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. She named him Liam after the brother who had saved her, and gave him the last name Vance. He had his Uncle Michael's kind eyes and his mother's resilient spirit. Michael became a quiet, loving presence in their lives, his art slowly filling with a light that had long been absent. Katja never saw Torin or Jessamine again. The last she heard, Hawthorne Holdings was in turmoil, and Torin had become a recluse in his golden penthouse, a king ruling an empire of shadows. He had his legacy, but he was utterly alone, having lost the future he tried so desperately to steal. Katja, however, had found hers. It wasn't a life of opulence, but it was real, and it was free. Katja's journey started with a shocking betrayal in the cold, sterile light of an ultrasound room, and ended with her reclaiming her strength, her identity, and her future. She escaped a gilded cage, exposed a web of lies that ran deeper than she could ever have imagined, and fought for the most precious thing in her life, her child. Her story is a powerful testament to resilience, the unbreakable bond of family, and the fact that truth is a power that even a millionaire's money cannot suppress. What would you have done in Katja's position? Let us know in the comments below.